Hello, it's nice to see you again. Up until last time, I introduced 3 of the 5 elements of a happy life: relationships, work, and home. Today, I'd like to talk about respecting your child's opinions. Stage 4 of a happy life. This section is about respecting your child's opinions. Regarding respecting the opinions and choices of children with disabilities during the parenting process, I have explained this in detail in episode 30 of BoTV. Today I will focus on what the author of A Happy Life says about respecting children's opinions. And I will also explain in detail about substitute consent, which is an alternative for supporting decision-making for children with disabilities. For parents of children with disabilities, considering their child's safety is truly a dilemma. On one hand, we want our children to be safely protected from discrimination, unfair treatment, abuse, neglect, and emotional harm. But on the other hand, we also want our children with disabilities to enjoy their lives, try new things, and live a happy life where their choices are respected. We want to teach our children to overcome adversity on their own. And just as we did, we want our children to learn through making mistakes. However, for families with children with disabilities, it is truly difficult to both protect their children safely and at the same time, respect their right to make choices. There must be no mistakes. Striking a balance is a very challenging task. Yes, families find it very difficult, and the same goes for agencies and the government. In life, people can generally be divided into those who take big risks and those who are reluctant to take even a little risk. Most people take responsibility for their own risks. There are also people such as mountaineers, skydivers, and rock climbers who are willing to risk their lives by engaging in extremely dangerous sports. And most of us drive as part of our daily lives. However, driving also involves accepting the risk of accidents and even the risk to our lives. All of these are decisions we make for ourselves. But our children with disabilities are unable to make any decisions about these matters. Even if the child has their own opinion, in many cases, the parent's opinion is dominant. To what extent should we accept our child's wishes, and where do we draw the line? As parents, this is a truly difficult decision. If it were about ourselves, we might be willing to take the risk, but because it involves our child with a disability, if there is even the slightest chance that our decision could put them in danger, we simply can't go through with it. As a result, the lives of children with disabilities often depend more on their parents' choices than on their own. That's why it's even more important to make a conscious effort to think from your child's perspective and to find out what they truly want. A happy life begins with respecting your child's choices. It means acknowledging your child's tastes, preferences, and values. It also means recognizing that your child has discernment and the ability to make choices. We know that children with disabilities are often able to clearly express what they want and what they do not want. We also know that they are well aware of their own limitations, so they tend to be very hesitant and cautious when making decisions. And we know that they have their own perspectives and opinions on various matters. However, unfortunately, it seems that not everyone understands and accepts the abilities of children with disabilities. Assuming that children with disabilities have no opinions or cannot make decisions is yet another barrier for them. This leads to ignoring their wishes and excluding them from both major and minor decisions. But I hope that everyone realizes that our children can also express and communicate their intentions. I want everyone who is with our children to be more patient, to listen to them, and to pay close attention, and if necessary, I hope they will learn the unique and non-verbal ways our children with disabilities communicate. Every action our children take is a form of communication. We want people who are with our children to try to figure out what these actions mean. But we need to be careful about certain people. That is, people who are not willing to learn how our children express themselves, people who are too busy to pay attention, and people who completely ignore our children's intentions. And even more serious cases, when people believe that only they know what their child needs best. This becomes especially difficult when experts or parents hold this belief. The author emphasizes the importance of having an attitude and mindset that recognizes the decision-making abilities of children and then introduces various legal ways to support decision-making for children with disabilities. In other words, in some cases, you may represent your children, and in other cases, you may even make decisions on their behalf. We do these things informally, for example, when opening a joint bank account with our child or when going to the hospital. In British Columbia, this type of decision-making support is officially recognized, and that is what is called a representation agreement. We believe that rather than giving someone else the authority to make decisions for your child, it is important to help your child develop their own decision-making abilities. You can help your child build decision-making skills in the following ways. First, respect the decision-making abilities your child already has. Second, help your child express their own unique decision-making voice. Third, present them with meaningful alternative choices. Fourth, help them understand and narrow down the alternatives. Fifth, support them so they can actually make decisions themselves. As mentioned earlier, people with disabilities are rarely presented with choices in their lives. As a result, they become passive and simply follow what they are told to do. However, on the other hand, if our children are with people who respect their decision-making abilities, it creates an environment where they can advocate for themselves. By doing this, we can reduce the risks of unfair treatment, neglect, and abuse that our children may face. When our children are able to express their own opinions, they can be safer. It is difficult to predict how our children will adapt in the future or what important decisions they will need to make. Of course, there are areas where children need special protection, but nothing is absolutely certain. Rather than trying to control what cannot be controlled, it is a better emergency measure to find people who can help your children make their own decisions and have them around your children. This is why the importance of relationships comes up again. Relationships are the cornerstone of decision-making support. There are additional benefits to building relationships and having a personal network. That is, relationships and networks help ensure sound decision-making and keep our children safer. Therefore, the first thing to do is to connect your child's friends and the people around them into a single network. Network members will monitor the services or programs your child receives and demand that their quality is maintained. Network members can also play roles beyond just supporting decision-making regarding the finances, health, and personal care of a child with disabilities. If it is difficult for the family to create such a network, it is necessary to join a community to build these kinds of relationships. Heroes Now is an organization created for this purpose. It can be considered a kind of network. Now, to summarize, here is what decision-making support for children with disabilities means. Children with disabilities actively participate. The opinions of children with disabilities are sought and taken into consideration. Caring, knowledgeable, and trustworthy people support decision-making around the child with disabilities and help effectively communicate their decisions. The needs of the child with disabilities take top priority, not the needs of staff or service agencies. The main focus is on the abilities and wishes of the child with disabilities. All possible options and alternatives are considered for the child with disabilities. The child's tastes, preferences, motivations, and ability to make choices are given especially careful consideration. Risks, failures, and mistakes experienced by the child with disabilities are seen as opportunities for learning. All forms of communication, whether verbal or non-verbal, are recognized as valid. Now, from this point on, I will introduce various legal alternatives for supporting decision-making for children with disabilities. In British Columbia, Canada, once a person turns 19 and becomes an adult, parents can no longer be their legal guardians. However, in many cases, children with disabilities are unable to make decisions on their own regarding these various matters. The system that legally supports decision-making for people with disabilities is called the Legal Decision-Making Support System. Among these, I will explain the main alternatives for supporting decision-making. The first is the guardianship system, which is called committeeship. This grants the authority to make all decisions on behalf of the individual, including legal, financial, health, and personal matters. This is designated through the court, which means it requires a lot of time and expense. The biggest problem is that the child with a disability is deemed legally incompetent. losing all decision-making authority. The second alternative I will introduce is the enduring power of attorney. This does not apply to decisions about health and personal, but delegates decision-making authority over financial issues. When granting this power of attorney, the individual, in this case, the child with a disability, must undergo an assessment of their intellectual capacity. They must have a certain level of decision-making ability. The third option I will introduce is consent to agency. First, let me explain what consent to agency is. Consent to agency is a legal means by which a child with a disability selects an agent to help manage their affairs and delegates authority to that agent. This is done in accordance with the Representation Agreement Act. This can address some of the shortcomings of the guardianship system. In other words, it is a system that allows adults with disabilities to receive decision-making support without having to go to court or being declared legally incompetent. It also addresses the shortcomings of enduring powers of attorney. It enables support for decision-making in all areas, and it does not require intellectual capacity. Therefore, consent to representation can be considered an excellent and practical low-cost alternative for children with disabilities. Of course, since this system is not for the parents but for the child with a disability, respecting the child's wishes is extremely important. There are two types of consent to representation. One is the Standard Representation Agreement, and the other is the Enhanced Representation Agreement. First, I will explain the Standard Representation Agreement, and it is outlined in Section 7. The scope of authority covered by the Standard Representation Agreement primarily concerns personal matters. This mainly means that the representative can handle various personal matters such as meals, exercise, living environment, religion, and taking care of pets. There are some limitations, however. Second, the representative can handle routine financial matters. They can represent you in banking tasks, applying for and handling government benefits, buying and selling cars, insurance, loans, income tax matters, and investment-related tasks. However, for major legal or financial matters, such as real estate transactions, an enduring power of attorney is required. Third, there are major health-related matters. Procedures such as surgery, general anesthesia, kidney dialysis, and chemotherapy can be handled by a representative. Other health-related tasks such as medical checkups, vaccinations, and taking medication can also be managed by a representative. This can be arranged without the help of a lawyer. You can keep the completed documents and simply make copies to use them when needed. After you have filled everything out, if you want to register online, you can do so with an organization called NIDOS. If you register with NIDOS, your documents will be stored online so you can access them anytime through an online connection. Next is the Extended Power of Attorney Consent form, which differs from the standard form in that it allows someone to make all decisions regarding health and personal matters on your behalf. In addition to all other decisions, it also enables the agent to decide on matters such as professional treatment and whether to continue life-sustaining treatment. Because of this, it requires a higher level of capacity than the standard form. This tool can be created without a lawyer. So how do you fill out the Power of Attorney Consent form? I will upload this form in the description section of this video so you can take a look. Filling out the form is not that difficult. As shown here, you will need people to sign the form. You need at least 6 people. The first is the adult, that is the disabled child who is the subject. There are fields for the subject's name, address, phone number, date of birth, and signature. And the second required person is the representative. For the representative, you need to write their name, address, phone number, and then their relationship to the disabled child. And third, there is the alternative representative, which means appointing a second representative in advance in case the primary representative is unable to act for any reason. Next, you need a monitor. You have to designate someone to monitor whether these representatives are fulfilling their duties properly. Again, you need to write down their name, address, phone number, and relationship, and then have them sign. Additionally, you need 2 witnesses. These witnesses are there to observe whether the representatives and the monitor have been properly designated. You need 2 witnesses, and you must provide their names, addresses, phone numbers, and their relationship to you. For example, in our case, our Child with a disability is the principal. I became the first representative, and my wife became the alternative representative. The monitor was my daughter. And for the two witnesses, we asked two acquaintances nearby to sign alongside us when we were preparing the representation agreement. If you need more information regarding the representation agreement, there is an organization called NIDOS. I will post the NIDOS website in the description, so please refer to it. Next, I will also upload the representation agreement form in the video section, so you can refer to that as well. Today, I talked about supported decision-making that respects the will of children with disabilities. Next time, I will return with another topic. Thank you very much for watching until now.